across America, we're having issues with water availability. I think it should be a human right to have access to affordable electricity and affordable water. What does that mean when big tech comes to town and pay more for the water and electricity than the local community? So once you make energy cheaper or you make an industrial process more efficient, you have to be really careful of this paradox that can come into play.
This is Professor Sarah Klain here with me today. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, talk about some of your research or academic interests?
Sure. My name is Sarah Klain. I recently started as an assistant professor at the University of Oregon, and I am an ecological economist. A lot of people really don't understand that being an ecological economist is different from being an environmental economist. As an ecological economist, I ask questions around sustainable scale, just distribution, and efficient allocation. And my starting point is understanding and trying to teach about how humanity is not on a sustainable trajectory to live well in the long term on planet Earth. So that makes me different from people in the economics department that are likely more doing research on like what are efficient levels of pollution and classic like environmental economics problems.
So more like kind of long-term focused, or?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes the research can be long-term oriented, but my research is more short-term or shorter-term oriented. I'm really interested in biodiversity conservation. I'm interested in figuring out socially just responses to the climate predicament that we're in right now. I'm interested in how do we develop renewable energy in responsible ways. And I'm also interested in how can the ocean help sequester carbon, and what policies can we influence to have the ocean contribute towards responding to the climate crisis.
Okay, awesome, that's awesome. I'm just going to start off asking you a very simple question, but I think it's important just to kind of lay the groundwork for the whole conversation. What exactly are data centers and what purpose do they serve?
Okay, well, data centers do a lot of computation. They solve problems, hopefully, and create lots of new problems. So anytime you use your computer or you connect to the internet or you use your cell phone, chances are you are connecting to a data center somewhere. People have this idea of a cloud. You know, I'm just going to save my data to the cloud. And that's a very smart marketing label on something that is not this like airy-fairy in a cloud. No, it is real materials using a lot of energy, electricity, in a specific location, storing your data, running your apps, helping you stream your videos, and they have real world consequences on the places where they are built. There's a lot of journalistic stories coming out about towns where data centers have come in relatively arid, dry places. And then there's farmers having issues getting enough groundwater because of all the water use of a data center. And I think another really important thing to pay attention to is the electricity consumption of these data centers. They can be really large, and especially out in rural communities, they can necessitate the development of new electricity generation. And unfortunately, more and more of that is natural gas because we can't keep up with renewable energy development related to the voracious appetite for electricity from data centers. And a lot of that is serving AI. So I'm sure this connects to later parts of our conversation.
Of course. Could you talk a little bit more about just real quickly, talk a little bit more about the connection to AI with data centers? Like, what purpose do they serve for AI? Like you know, they help the development of AI. Can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. So I don't do research on AI, but I have been paying attention to this topic, and my understanding is that AI is based on large language models, LLMs, and they require an incredible amount of electricity in the training of the large language model.
Okay.
And then there's also a lot of data servers needed for the use of AI. So you've got two phases here, both like the training to generate the technology that then can be incorporated into ChatGPT and Gemini and all the other ones out there. And then you've got the day-to-day use of people relying on AI to try to maybe solve some problems and then introduce a whole suite of other problems.
Right. Yeah, because I think a lot of people think, when they think about the connection to data centers, I think a lot of people think that it's just about the use of AI, about the use of, ChatGPT or, chat bots like that, but also there's a focus on the training. Like the training takes up a lot of energy as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I have another,
so much energy. I read a recent report from the USGS. You can find it on the internet, US Geological Society. If current trends continue, data servers will consume 12% of the total electricity generated in the US. You mean 12 doesn't sound like a huge number, but when you think of like the entire country of how many 360 million people, 12% of our energy consumption might be to feed data centers. Like that is huge. And the biggest problem, in my opinion, with that voracious increase in demand of electricity is it is just washing out our attempts at decarbonization to tackle the climate crisis. Like we can spout off desires to stay below 1.5 degrees warming, and to do that we absolutely need to decarbonize. And we are building wind turbines and solar and some geothermal, but like the rate that we're building that is totally washed out by the increase in demand from data centers. And AI is a big part of that increase in demand.
Okay, interesting. I would like to shift just a little bit here. But you hear a lot of people talking about the water consumption of these data centers. Could you kind of explain a little bit about the role that water plays in these data centers and what impact that has on the environment?
Sure. So data centers require a lot of cooling. And my understanding is that water is used for some of that cooling.
Right.
The cooling also takes the form of like air conditioning, and that's based on using electricity to cool the air. But data centers need a lot of water for them to properly function. And place really matters. If you put a data center that needs a lot of electricity and a lot of water in a place that doesn't have much electricity generation, or, I mean, it's connected to the grid usually, I would assume always. So that can help allay local, like you don't necessarily need local generation of electricity. However, the water issue can be quite problematic in places that are already water stressed. And across America, we're having issues with water availability. Our agricultural systems across America tend not to, a lot of the systems are not using water in sustainable ways. And then you add the increased variability of climate change and prolonged droughts. So you have to be really careful where you site these data centers, because you need to plan on what is that going to do to the local availability of water.
Right. I was going to bring up an example here. From 2018 to 2023, Uruguay experienced its worst drought in 75 years. And not long after this, in 2024, Google began construction on an $850 million data center there in Uruguay. There was no public dialogue involved. And there were widespread protests in Uruguay. Why is it that data centers are often built in locations that are prone to droughts, if there is a reason for that? And when they're built in these climates, if they are using water cooling, where is that water coming from? Where are they taking that water?
I don't know the data about if data centers are built in places more prone to drought.
For like particularly, you don't know.
I don't know that data. I would
Okay.
expect that if you're a data center developer, you are looking for places where people are willing to sell you cheap land,
Right.
and you need access to a lot of electricity, and you can probably pay the local water utility a higher amount per unit of water than most agriculturalists can pay. A lot of farmers are operate on really thin margins, and some of them buy their water, some of them have their own water systems, but I would imagine that big tech has a higher ability to pay for electricity and water. And this, I think, may have dire consequences for local communities. It may also jack up electricity prices, particularly in rural and often economically marginalized, poorer regions. Like a data center might come in and say, like, we'll pay you X amount per gigawatt or megawatt of energy, and that increase in demand could increase the price of electricity, and like poor people could no longer afford to purchase electricity or
Right.
water. You had a question about water. Can you repeat that section of it?
I asked where the water's coming, like where, like in these drier climates, like in Uruguay, for example, when they're using water cooling, where are they getting that water?
It's probably from underground
Right.
water
And that would that take
resources.
away from, like, you know,
It could.
access to tap water and.
Potentially, like, it could lower the water table in that area, and you know, farmers often have wells, and who knows how deep they are, and the groundwater level might go lower than the farmers' wells. So there's some really big sustainability concerns, and also some big justice concerns, like the inequity in access to capital between big tech versus small rural landowners or farmers, or even local small municipalities. Like, how do they stand up for having, you know, I think it should be a human right to have access to affordable electricity and affordable water. What does that mean when big tech comes to town and can pay more for the water and electricity than the local community? Like, I'd imagine some people would be like, oh, we'll get like big tax benefits from having this data farm in our community. A thing that's also, as an ecological economist, it's important to point out that once you build a data farm, it doesn't actually employ very many people.
Right.
Like, the construction of it employs quite a few people for a short amount of time, but then the long term, like the maintenance of a data farm, a skeletal crew can maintain a rather large data farm.
So really, like, these are not benefiting, like, you know, your everyday people that are living by these data centers.
Maybe
not in
they
the short
pay enough taxes to
Right.
contribute to the local hospital, school, municipal, public resources. It just depends on what. Did they have savvy negotiators in the planning process? Like, what kind of taxes are they paying, to whom
Right.
are they paying? So I think there's a lot of variability, but I think there are big equity and justice concerns
Okay.
in thinking through this, about who benefits, who loses, and ultimately for what. Like,
Yeah, why are we doing this?
yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I've got
man.
my smartphone, but I
Yeah.
think a lot of our use of technology, and especially social media, is it really making us better off? Is it making us better humans?
Yeah.
Is it making for a better society? There's some
A lot
questions
to think
there.
about. I'd like to talk a little bit about like the chips that are used for the AI development, such as graphics processing units. But the production of these chips sometimes can also have quite significant impacts on the environment. Could you go into that a little bit? Explain the environmental impacts that, you know, maybe like the mining that can contribute to this, or yeah.
Yeah, so you need super clean water to
Okay.
manufacture these chips. And for that, you need access to abundant water, and then you need to do a lot of filtration and really deeply cleaning this water, which is energy intensive.
So more water consumption.
Water
than just for the chips.
intensive, for sure, to create these GPUs. And like, let's also not forget that the data farms themselves, they have a lot of copper, they have gold, they have silver, they have, there's magnets in these data centers that are made with rare earth elements. There are many parts of the periodic table represented in these data farms, and are those grown on farms? No, they are mined. They are mined in various places all over the world. Like, the US wants to be self-sufficient when it comes to the materials needed to build chips and data farms, and we are not. We are not self-reliant. We import materials from mines all over the world to build data farms, and also in chip production. We're trying to get more chip production domestically to varying degrees of success. But the whole thing, the whole like making the GPUs, making the chips, making the data farms, it all requires enormous amounts of energy and material. And I think, as an ecological economist and human living on this earth with children, so I am invested in the future, we have to really ask hard questions about how can we live well with globally less material and energy throughput. Like, our trajectories are not sustainable. We cannot continue to consume more and more materials and energy without really dire consequences. Mining, I recently went to a talk in the econ department where there is a Stanford postdoc researcher using big data to show that children between the ages of 1 and 3 are more likely to die if they live in communities downstream from tailings ponds, from mines. There is a horrific human cost to our inability to clean up after our own messes. Like, these mines, in a lot of them are rare earth minerals, a lot are mined in Africa, and it is very unclear the extent to which they actually enforce environmental and social standards in the mining. And we are consuming these products at a rate that is accelerating. And I think all of us need to think really carefully about the consequences of our consumption in the wealthy, developed country, what that means for poorer countries, and all the people kind of like, frankly, just not valued. Like, those children downstream of tailings ponds, like, we got to think hard about who's responsible for that mess. How can we deal with it? How do we reduce childhood mortality in these communities? Some tough questions.
Do you think there possibly could be more sustainable ways to develop these chips, or what do you think?
Absolutely. There's always more. It usually involves trade-offs, though. Like, it might be more energy efficient, but it might use more rare earth material. I don't know the specific trade-offs. Engineers are always trying to make our products more efficient. I will say, though, I want everybody to Google the Jevons paradox, or the rebound effect.
Okay.
So it's a concept from economics that is so relevant to where we are today. Jevons was this economist in the early days of the development of economics as a field in England, and he was looking at the development of coal and coal mining in England, and he noticed that everyone thought that once you got a more efficient coal railroad engine that was burning coal, if you just were able to go like 1 more kilometer or 1 more mile on less amount of coal, then that would reduce the need for coal mining. But the paradox part of it is that you make a more efficient steam train, you actually build more rail lines.
Right.
So like, your drive to efficiency makes the product cheaper, and when a price goes down, usually demand goes up. So more is actually consumed. Another example of that is like LED lights. yeah, they consume way less electricity. And then we've got like Las Vegas building that like dome full of millions, hundreds of thousands of lights. And you can see it playing out in getting a more fuel efficient car. You think, oh, you get a more fuel efficient car, you'll drive less. No, you drive more because you can drive more at the same cost.
Right.
So once you make energy cheaper or you make an industrial process more efficient, you have to be really careful of this paradox that can come into play. And it's relevant recently because, 6 months ago, a year ago, China announced that they developed a more energy efficient AI system. And
Deep, I think was it called?
Deep.
Deep.
And with that, it's like, okay, you can have a more efficient AI, which might just result in more total consumption because the per unit is cheaper and that can open up new possibilities for its use. Right. So I just want every engineer to really learn about Jevons paradox and the rebound effect and think about how do we address that paradox in policy and practice.
Yeah, because how do we address, should we be aiming for efficiency or should we not?
In some ways,
it's kind of a weird
efficiency
situation.
is great. Like you can have. Sorry, my mic came off.
Sorry.
I want efficient stuff.
Oh, there you go. That's good.
I want efficiency can reduce prices.
Right.
Like it can make things more affordable. We should absolutely try to have for example, more efficient air conditioning so that in some ways there's a justice element to it. If you make a product cheaper, poorer people can afford it. So we owe it to people in hot countries that don't have much money to try to develop more efficient, less costly air conditioning units. It also means that we might be air conditioning outdoor football stadiums and using absurd amounts of energy in richer countries because we now have more efficient refrigeration.
So it depends on what we use these new efficiencies for.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. A tool that really helps me organize my thinking around this is Kate Raworth is an economist that developed this idea of a green donut.
Okay.
And in this donut model, which will be in my ecological economics class, she makes the argument that economics and the field of economics and figuring out how we organize our material world and the systems through which our goods and services flow and function, we should aspire to enabling all people to reach a certain level of consumption. You have to consume to survive. We are animals. We need to eat. We should have some modicum of comfort in our lives. So we need to reach this social foundation. And then we also need an ecological ceiling. Okay. We need to figure out ways that we can provide a certain standard of living for all people around the globe. And then we also need to be aware that we live on one planet and we need to restrain consumption within some ceiling so that we don't absolutely kill our planet and go into catastrophic climate change. And figuring out that sweet spot between the social foundation and the ecological limits of what the planet can sustain is really tricky. But I think her book, Donut Economics, and that diagram provides a really helpful compass for how do we enable people to have affordable air conditioning while not just enabling cheap air conditioning to be used in ways that many would be considered them as wasteful, or how do we provide people with enough healthy food but not excessive quantities of processed food that then make them unhealthy. I think it's also, you can think about it in health. There's a healthy level of consumption and there's an unhealthy level of consumption in all domains. How do we get to that healthy level of consumption?
How do you think we could start taking a step in the right direction on kind of balancing our healthy level of consumption? How do you think, what are some steps that we could take in that direction?
So on a hyper-local level, we can try to eat more seasonally. Try to when you go to the grocery store, see what's in season. And often that's more affordable. And I hope you like kale if you live in Oregon. But there's other things like partaking in, when it's apple season or berry season, like being embedded in the ecosystem in which you live and getting your food from your more local ecosystem can give you a really tangible connection to like your place on this planet. Don't get me wrong, I like coffee, I like chocolate. Those are not grown in Oregon. They come in from far away, but just putting a little bit more reflection time into what you're consuming. I also am a big believer of figuring out how to create a culture of reuse and repair and having friends who also prioritize that. I think a big part of it is like being in a community where people think it's cool to patch your jacket and to go thrift, like shopping used things rather than buying new things. And I know we live in a world where we are bombarded with advertisements where you always want the new shiny object, and I'm totally guilty of this myself at times, but I do try to extend, like, how can I just get like 6 more months of life out of this phone before I buy another one, because I know there's like materials mined in unsavory conditions far away. There's all of these consequences of our consumption that are hard to see sometimes and feel very far away. So I think we need to build a community and friendships and connections to re-embed ourselves in our more local ecosystem, and keep learning, keep learning about these. Another resource that I think a lot of students could benefit from is my favorite podcast called The Great Simplification. Okay. That has really informed my thinking about AI and the polycrisis. So this polycrisis is this idea that we are currently in a time of interacting global problems. So climate change is also connected to biodiversity loss, and that's also connected to excessive pollution in our waterways and dead zones across the planet. So there's all of these problems, and then that feeds into geopolitical crises with famines in certain parts of the world and political unrest. So we're in this like uncomfortable polycrisis time, and to weather that we need strong bonds with people. And I also am a big believer in person connections to people. And I think that excessive time online and excessive time interacting with chatbots is a emergent issue. And we need to create a culture of emphasis on building relationships with friends and family in person, not just using our digital devices. Like, I don't know if you've watched the movie Her, but it's really depressing.
Right, yeah.
It just feels a little bit like gross. This person falls in love with an operating system, and then at the end, spoiler alert, realizes that lots of other people have fallen in love with the same computer operating system, and that there's chatbots feel like they're back and forth, but they're actually very one-sided. It's like somebody falling in love in a non-reciprocal relationship that is not healthy. So
So you think there's a cultural element to all of this, and we need to reshape how our community looks at these different issues. So that's interesting. Okay, so socializing plays a much bigger role in this than
I think we all need to spend more time reflecting on what does a good life mean for me? What does a good life mean for my family, my community? Like it's like scaling in and out. Like, is AI good for me? Is it good for my children? Is it good for my parents? Is it good for the university? Like, there's these trade-offs. It's like in some contexts it can be helpful, but in other contexts it can be deeply problematic. So we just need to make sure that we take a critical look at some of these technologies. And I also think it's really important to not think that the widespread adoption of AI is an inevitability. It is not inevitable. It depends on the choices of a lot of people. It also depends on the choices of people in our governance, both local, state, regional, national, international. Like, what rules and regulations are they going to put in play? Are there going to be guardrails or not?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's this like inevitable, just look at America compared to Japan or Switzerland, where you can like take a train almost everywhere.
Right.
It's not inevitable that America developed with this car-based transportation system. It played out so differently in other places, and frankly, I think we now have infrastructure that requires way more carbon per capita than somewhere where you can take reliable, comfortable public transit, mass transit to get to where you want to go. So there's nothing inevitable about AI, and we're at the, it's getting intense now, but we can still collectively influence the path of development that AI takes.
So in a way, our beliefs about the future are also playing a big role here. Because you said that like a lot of people believe that the widespread adoption of AI is inevitable. In a way, maybe we need to shift our beliefs a little bit about the future.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would imagine that people 2,000 years ago thought that slavery was normal. Like humans, we just have slaves. And women didn't get the right to vote until like my grandmother's generation. Like, that is not that long ago. So there are ways that we have fundamentally shifted what is considered just and right and normal. It's now not okay to own other humans. It's now widespread among, I would say, Western democracies that women should have the right to vote. So, and even with technological adoption, we might be in a big AI bubble right now. I don't know.
I've heard a lot about that. Yeah.
And we might be in a Bitcoin bubble right now. I'm not investing in that. So I just think that Silicon Valley has this hubris that is really not healthy. And it's really inconsiderate of the incredible impacts that it has on energy consumption and water consumption. So we have to think more like an ecological economist, like what is the sustainable scale for this technology? What is the just distribution of the benefits and costs? And we should not ignore the costs. We got to think critically about the costs of this technology. And then within that, how can we go forward in an efficient way? But we really have to think about that sustainable scale and just distribution.
Right. Given the recent surge in the energy demand of data centers, some data center operators have been exploring alternative power options like nuclear technologies or hydrogen fuel cells. What would you say are the pros and cons of these different options, and what impact would those options have on the environment?
There's a lot of variability. So I think geothermal is kind of having a resurgence lately, and there's a lot of R&D to be done with geothermal. It's also important to recognize that like you can't build geothermal just anywhere. There's very specific locations with activity below the earth that it has to tap into. There are like heat pumps that can work regardless of like geothermal. Like, I don't know, Iceland has all of this like very hot earth not very far below the surface, so they're able to like almost completely power their island just with geothermal, but like that's not the same conditions in other places. Solar and wind have their pros and cons. Like solar and wind, they can be built rather quickly. But they take up a lot of space, and a lot of people don't like looking at them. And there's been a lot of pushback about like developing them in various places. They also use rare earth elements. The nacelle of a wind turbine has rare earth elements in it, and solar panels have a lot of mined materials in them. They're not just like free of environmental impact. They have their own
Kind of
environmental
comes back
impact.
to the AI chips problem too with the mining.
Yeah, but at least with those, once you mine them,
Mm-hmm.
if you have the right policies in place, you can circulate those materials. Like your solar panels can then be dismantled and hopefully recycled.
Okay.
So there's this thought that if we can get robust reuse and recycling policies established, then in the long term, we wouldn't have to mine as much virgin material.
Right.
We're still a long ways from there, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then nuclear, I mean, nuclear, it promises zero or low carbon electricity. It creates waste that will be toxic to life for 10,000 or more years. That's a big trade-off. And in America, we have not figured out where we're going to put that waste. And right now, there are closed down nuclear power plants with temporarily storing the nuclear waste on site. Temporarily for my entire, like half of my life, 20 years of temporary storage on site. So we have some big waste management issues to figure out with nuclear. I think the better question to ask is how can we advance human well-being with less energy and material consumption? And that goes back to a bigger question of like, what is a good life? How can we lead good lives? And there's so much psychological research coming out about how robust, strong human-to-human relationships underpin well-being far more than material consumption after you've got your basic needs met.
Right. So you think maybe this kind of comes back to questions about meaning and purpose? Maybe we need to focus more on what it means to live a happy life.
Yeah, and this is an old question.
Yeah.
The Greeks wrote all about eudaimonia. That was a major topic of discussion in like Aristotle and ancient Greek philosophers waxing poetically about eudaimonia. What is a good life? This is not a new question.
Right.
We just have technology that enables hyperconsumption on a level never before experienced in all of human history.
Right.
And there are certain ways where life is way more awesome now. Like you can have children and not have real big concerns about them dying before they're 5 years old. And like, I'm a big fan of modern medicine. Like, think about life without a dentist and without Novocaine. There's so many incredible advances, and like it's probably never been better to be female on planet Earth than it is right now. So like we gotta use all of this science and technology, but not forget about like the big questions of like what is a meaningful life and how can we have high quality lives with less energy and material consumption. And I think it's possible. I absolutely think it's possible, and I also think a big part of that is like constraining the 0.1%, the number of trillionaires how can we redesign our systems of governance and taxation so that we can invest in education and healthcare and solid, like better food systems so that people can be healthier? Like, I kind of agree with that, what is it, Yvonne Chouinard's children saying that like a billionaire is a policy problem. Like, they shouldn't exist. Why do we have so much homelessness and food insecurity in America while we have so many billionaires and do we have a trillionaire on our way to having maybe Elon Musk? I don't know. But like something's really messed up with like the levels of poverty and health problems we're having, with the amount of wealth we have, and a lot of that is around distribution of wealth, and that is like a politically toxic topic to handle, but we need to keep asking the right questions and trying to figure out better systems.
Right. Before we wrap up, I'm just going to ask one more question here. Well, there has been a lot of focus on the development of AI harming the environment. I'd like us to think a little about if they have any potential positive impacts on the environment. The IEA says that the widespread adoption of existing AI applications could lead to emissions reductions that are far larger than the emissions from data centers. but also far smaller than what is needed to address climate change. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that in the end AI will be a net benefit for the environment, or do you think that these negative impacts outweigh positive impacts? And do you think that there is a way for us to sustainably incorporate AI into our lives in a way that benefits us?
Okay, so how could AI help reduce emissions? Well, it can help pinpoint methane leaks and methane emissions. Like there's big data out there. There's these satellites orbiting the Earth. It's like so many gigabytes of information that then can be processed with AI and large language model, with AI to pinpoint regions or point sources of methane emissions. AI could potentially help us better predict the weather, so better predict catastrophes like droughts. Maybe it can help predict fire risk in ways that could help mitigate it. AI can help us run the grid, like the electrical grid, in a more efficient way. But I think the IEA, International Energy Agency or Association,
Something like that, yeah.
something like that, which is a really robust source of information. I want them to spend more time thinking about Jevons paradox and the rebound effect in relation to AI, because I think if we figure out ways to make AI even cheaper, then it'll just be used more, and then that will result in more total consumption of computing power. And I am a bit skeptical of how it will. Like, it's really hard for me to see AI actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions, especially because, like, who are we kidding? The fossil fuel companies are all over AI. They are using AI to help extract more fossil fuels and to extract more fossil fuels at lower cost. So it's just driving, like, the fossil fuel industry to have record profits. So I'm a bit skeptical that AI could, like, that the net greenhouse gas emissions benefit could outweigh its contribution to fossil fuel extraction. I'm very skeptical that AI could be net positive for the environment.
Okay. Here's a lot to think about. Thank you, Professor Klain, for coming here to do this interview. And